Okay, part two of $21 paddle. It is early Monday morning. Weather is about to turn. Wind is building. It says it's 12 gusting to 15. I don't think it's quite there yet. I should say I'm in the Outer Banks and gonna get the boat on the water with the $21 paddle to see how it feels before the weather turns atrocious. So quickly, let's get on the water. I absolutely wanted to go without a dry suit, which has still a little too much air in it. But the water is, let's make an adjustment there. The water is 55, 56 degrees, something like that. The air temperature is 60 degrees. So could do it, but I gotta tell you, just moving my boat and walking across the grass, my feet got a little numb barefoot. So dry suit it is. You know, right off the bat, I'm a big fan of first impressions. This does not feel horrible. That wiggle is obviously still there. Not as noticeable doing that quick sweep turn. As I get further out, you may not be able to hear me because of the wind. We'll do the best that we can. First thing I'm seeing is that lack of adjustability in the drip rings. They are right at the throat of the paddle and are submerging when I'm paddling. I don't like that. My hands are going to end up wet today. In fact, I might stay behind this brake for a bit just to do some testy tests with this thing. Wind is already picking up as I get out just a little bit. The added weight is immediately noticeable. Coming from my Werner or my Lendal. My Werner's on the back deck just in case. I don't anticipate this thing breaking, but I also don't have a whole lot of faith. I'm not feeling a whole lot of flex in the blades. I tested the blades to see flex while I was on land. They are pretty flexy. I am not feeling a whole lot of flex when I paddle. And what happens is, well, let's talk about flex off the water when I'm not in wind. It's not bad. interesting. The buttons are away from you. That's an oddball thing. That is just weird to have those on the other side. In general, here are our first thoughts. I've been paddling about 30 minutes with this. The biggest issue for me right now is the weight. It definitely feels heavy, and I definitely feel that in my shoulders. It's just more weight in this sort of movement than they're used to carrying. It feels heavy. Because of that, it feels a little sluggish in the water. Doesn't pop. Like, I talk about feel in this section, right? What does it feel like? It doesn't pop the way a high quality paddle pops. The flex is not that noticeable. I have paddled better paddles, like more expensive paddles, with less flex. And when I get back to the van, I'll talk about flex and sort of how that boils down to the physics of moving a boat as best as I can, not being a physicist. Long term, particularly in saltwater, I'm worried about this single rivet that is holding the blade on. I don't have faith that that's gonna last. Like, if I paddled with this paddle all year, I doubt that paddle would last a full year. I think that the salt water would just destroy that rivet and the blade would unexpectedly come off. I've done some high stress maneuvers. I did a sculling draw, sculling brace, bow rudder. Bow rudder that didn't turn much because of the wind on my tail. And they don't feel loose or anything like that. Yeah, so not horrible, but we'll do a final conclusion. Like, where are we? How is this thing? I will say, even with a lousy paddle, it still feels great to be paddling. Does it float? Someone mentioned in the comments from part 1 that it would probably sink. It doesn't pop up out of the water particularly quickly, but it definitely does not sink. So there is that. All right, let's transition to the van and have a final conclusion on the $21 paddle. Okay, let's go over this relatively quickly because there's not that much to say. First, I want to talk a little bit about flex in a paddle blade. So flex in a shaft is never good. Flex in a paddle blade, when you plant the blade in the water and push, the blade is where all that force is. So if you have a flexi is a technical term I just made up, a flexi blade, it'll give a little bit at the beginning of that stroke. And a lot of people say, oh, that's bad. You're giving up energy. You don't want that. I don't think it's bad, but I'm not like a hydrophysicist or whatever that person is, right? So if you are a hydrophysicist, which is also a word I just made up, hydrodynamics. If you study hydrodynamics, you might have the answer to this. I believe it's not really an issue in terms of power, because when your stroke stops, that blade unflexes, giving you whatever power you have lost back. Now, you could say the blade is not really at the angle it's supposed to be throughout the stroke because it's flexing a little bit, so even though you're getting the power back, it's not performing as well as it should. And I will say, whether you're getting the power back or not, it just doesn't feel good. I want a paddle to feel snappy in the water. I want to know that as I am transmitting movement from my body to the paddle, to the blade, to the water, be it a forward stroke, a turning stroke, a bracing stroke, whatever, I want to know that I'm getting all the slice or press out of that blade that I can. So I'm not really worried about the flex, except that it doesn't feel good. But I didn't feel a whole lot of flex in that, which clearly had a lot of flex on dry land. It felt fine. It felt like a inexpensive paddle. My big concerns are those rivets. I don't think, particularly if you're paddling in salt water, that's going to hold up long term. I think those are going to rust and fall out, and I don't think that there's anything else holding that blade in. You're just going to lose a blade off the end of your shaft, and then you've got a canoe paddle. That's my biggest concern. I really didn't like, it seems like a little thing, but I really didn't like that button was away from me. Every paddle I've ever used, the button is towards me, so you can quickly hit it with your thumb. And I'm talking about the ferrule button to angle the paddle. Of course, I don't like that I get an option right hand or left hand in terms of feather on that blade. I much prefer the Lendal and the Werner, where I get more control over how much feather I want out of the Lendal, but I get a lot of control out of it with the Werner. The Werner also has a gear on the inside of the ferrule to hold everything tight, which I really like. Build quality is not great, but it's not the worst I've ever seen. So would I recommend you buying a $21 paddle? No, I wouldn't. But that also doesn't mean that you need to spend $400 on a paddle. My first paddle was $70. It was made by Harmony Products. I'm guilty of all the things that I talk about new paddlers are guilty of. I bought a boat. I spent a lot of money on a boat. I need a roof rack. I didn't realize I was going to need a roof rack. I bought a PFD as well. And I bought a nice PFD. I bought a great Lotus Designs PFD. I didn't have a whole lot of money left. I bought a cheap paddle. But it was actually fine. It was not an aluminum shaft. I've never, other than this one, owned a paddle with an aluminum shaft. And so it had like a tri-weave fiberglass shaft and a plastic blade. My girlfriend at the time, for my birthday, less than a year later, bought me a Werner Kamano. And that was how I knew I should marry her. A woman that'll buy you a paddle like that, you got to hold on to. So you don't have to buy a $400 paddle. I bought a cheap paddle. I used it for about a year, maybe a little bit less. Go hit in between. I think the Werner Skagit is a great first paddle. It's a plastic blade on a carbon fiber shaft. I won it the last time I checked. It was like $130. It's probably now $150. It's not a $400 paddle. It's not a $21 paddle, right? I really wouldn't go below $100 on a paddle if you're paddle shopping. I wouldn't do one with an aluminum shaft. Oh, I'm realizing it might have been the wind, but my hands are cold. It might have been that paddle shaft. That's not science. That's just how I'm feeling. I wouldn't do an aluminum shaft. I'm okay with plastic blades. particularly for new paddlers. Like, I think it's great if you're like a rock gardener, if you play in surf, stuff like that, where your paddle's going to take a beating, go with plastic blades. I don't do those things. I use a carbon paddle. When we say carbon, it's carbon blade, carbon shaft. We just shorten it to make it carbon. So, yeah. Would I recommend this paddle? No, but I've paddled with worse. The real question is, what am I going to do with it now? I'm going to try and, I guess, return it and get my $20 back. I may just put it on the ceiling with some other paddles, and it'll be a discussion point. Yeah, so there we are. That is the $21 paddle, the cheapest paddle on Amazon. I wouldn't do it again, but it was much better than I thought it was going to be. So you never know. Do me a favor, if you enjoyed this, hit like, hit subscribe. My books are on Coffee. The Guide's Way is on Coffee. You want to know all the ways, all the tips and tricks that me and my friends have picked up over decades, literal decades of paddling and adventure. There is a Sea Kayaking Guide's Way and just an Outdoors Guide's Way. They're both available on Coffee, and right now I forget how much they are, $4.99 or $5.99 for well over 200 tips, tricks, and things like that. Stickers are on there. All the risk management stuff is on there. My gear list is on there. Head over to Coffee, get yourself something, and it'll help support the channel. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you on the water.